found an alien woman shivering in the cold, giving her his blanket changed both their lives forever. The market was loud, but the wind was louder. Cold, sharp air rushed between the narrow metal stalls, carrying the smell of rust and spoiled food. Jaron walked with his head down, hands deep in his worn coat pockets. His boots scraped the frozen ground. He had 1 credit left. Just one. Enough for a cheap meal, maybe a drink if he was lucky. But luck had not been his friend for many years. He passed a stall selling fried meat. The smell hit him hard. His stomach growled, reminding him how long it had been since he last ate. He reached into his pocket and touched the thin metal coin. That coin was survival, and then he saw her. She was sitting in the shadow of a broken wall, knees pulled to her chest. Her arms were wrapped around herself, but she was still shaking. Her skin was pale blue, with faint silver lines running along her neck and cheeks, alien markings. Her hair, long and tangled, stuck to her face in frozen strands. People walked past her like she wasn't there. Some looked away quickly, others stepped over her legs as if she were trash in the street. Jaron slowed down. Something about her eyes caught him. They were open, but distant, staring at nothing. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled, fingers thin like sticks. The wind cut through Jaron's coat, and he imagined how it must feel for her, without even a piece of cloth to cover herself. He looked at the coin in his hand. 1 credit. He turned his head toward the food stall again. His stomach twisted painfully. He could walk away. No one would know. She was just another forgotten soul in the city. But he didn't walk away. He crossed to a nearby vendor who was selling old blankets. The man behind the stall was short and fat, with greasy hands. 1 blanket, Jaron said, pointing at a thick, patched one. The vendor looked him up and down. That'll be 1 credit. Jaron placed the coin on the counter. The vendor smirked. You're wasting your last coin on that? He nodded toward the alien woman. She's not even your kind. Let her freeze. Jaron didn't answer. He took the blanket and walked toward her. She didn't react when he knelt beside her. Slowly, he wrapped the blanket around her thin shoulders. The fabric looked too big on her small frame. Her head lifted slightly, and for the first time she looked at him. Her eyes were a deep, glowing violet, the kind that seemed to hold light inside them. She blinked slowly. Why? Her voice was soft, broken, and weak. Jaron hesitated. He didn't have an answer that made sense, even to himself. Because it's cold, he said finally. She held the blanket tighter, like it was the most precious thing she had ever touched. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth as if to say something more, but a shadow fell over them. Jaron looked up. 4 tall figures were walking down the market path, their black armor shining under the pale light. Alien enforcers. Their eyes scanned the crowd, and each carried a scanner device that beeped whenever it detected certain life signs. The crowd thinned quickly. People moved out of the way, not wanting to be noticed. Jaron felt the woman's body tense under the blanket. She pulled it higher over her head, hiding her face. They will find me, she whispered, her voice shaking. Jaron's mind raced. If the enforcers were looking for her, and they saw him with her, they would take him too, or worse. He should walk away now. Pretend he didn't know her. Pretend he had never stopped, but he couldn't. The enforcers were getting closer. The scanner in one of their hands beeped faintly. Jaron knew that sound. It meant they had picked up a trace. Without thinking, he grabbed her arm. Come on, she didn't resist. She let him pull her to her feet, though she stumbled from weakness. Together, they slipped between 2 market stalls and into a narrow alley. The smell of rotting food hit them, but Jaron didn't slow down. Sound of boots on metal followed them. Jaron turned corner after corner, his heart pounding in his ears. The woman clung to the blanket, her breath coming in short gasps. Behind them, the enforcers' voices echoed, speaking in a language Sharen didn't understand. Finally, they reached a side street with no one in sight. Jaren stopped to catch his breath. She leaned against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" he asked. Her gaze flicked to the street behind them. "Someone they want." Before Jaren could ask more, the sound of the enforcers. Scanners echoed again, this time much closer. Jaren grabbed her hand. "We're not safe here." They disappeared into the shadows. Jaren's apartment was small, dark, and smelled faintly of oil and metal. The walls were thin, patched with old sheets of steel. A single heater in the corner hummed weakly, doing its best against the cold. He closed the door quickly and locked all 3 bolts. The woman stood in the middle of the room, still wrapped in the blanket, her eyes darting around like a trapped bird. "You're safe here," Jaren said, though the words felt strange in his mouth. He wasn't sure if they were true. She didn't answer. Her gaze moved from the cracked window to the broken chair in the corner, then to the small table where his tools lay scattered. She looked like she was memorizing the space, searching for escape routes. Jaren walked to the heater and turned the dial. The old thing groaned but blew a little more warm air. "Sit," he said, pointing to the bed. She hesitated, then slowly lowered herself onto the edge, still clutching the blanket. "What's your name?" Jaren asked. She stared at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to tell him. "Leora." Her voice was soft but clearer than before. "All right, Leora, I'm Jaren." She nodded once, but kept her eyes on the floor. He poured some water from a dented jug into a cup and handed it to her. Her fingers brushed his when she took it. They were icy cold. She drank quickly, as if she hadn't had water in days. Jaren leaned back in his chair. "You want to tell me why those enforcers are hunting you?" Her grip tightened on the cup. "No." "Fair enough," he said, but he knew that answer would not keep him safe. The room was quiet except for the faint hiss of the heater. Outside, the sound of distant engines rose and fell, patrols moving through the city. Leora shifted under the blanket. She looked exhausted, but her eyes never fully closed. Every small sound made her flinch. When Jaren finally lay down on the bed, he pretended to sleep. He kept one eye half open, watching her. Hours passed. The heater's hum and the muffled city noises filled the silence. Then, in the dark, he heard its soft broken words in a language he didn't know. Leora was talking in her sleep. He reached for his datapad on the table and quietly pressed record. Her voice trembled as she spoke. The sounds were strange, melodic, yet heavy with fear. In the morning, after she had fallen into deeper sleep, Jaren used a translation app. The datapad processed the recording, beeped once, and displayed the words, "They will find me. They always find me." Jaren's chest tightened. He didn't know what trouble she had brought into his home, but one thing was clear: if they found her, they would find him too. And in this city, being found often meant you disappeared forever. The knock came just after dawn. It wasn't polite. It was heavy, 3 solid thuds that rattled the thin metal door. Jaren froze halfway through tightening a bolt on his boot. Leora was still on the bed, eyes half open from a restless night. The sound snapped her fully awake. Her hand tightened around the blanket like it was armor. "Don't move," Jaren whispered. The knock came again, harder this time. Then a voice, cold and sharp, "Open, inspection." Jaren's stomach dropped. That wasn't a neighbor. That was an enforcer. He grabbed Leora by the arm and pulled her toward the corner. The floorboards there were loose. He had a storage space under them for things the law didn't need to see. She hesitated, her violet eyes wide. "They will scan, just get in," Jaren hissed. She lowered herself into the narrow space, curling up as small as she could. Jaren pulled the boards back into place and kicked a dusty rug over them. The door shook under a third round of pounding. He opened it just enough to see the black armor and glowing visor of the enforcer. "Routine." "Check," the enforcer said. His voice was mechanical, filtered through a translator device. "We're tracking an illegal life form in this sector." Species code Theta 97. You will comply. Jaren forced a shrug. Just me here. No one visits. The enforcer pushed past him without asking. Boots thudded on the metal floor. A handheld scanner beeped softly as it swept the room. Jaren's heart pounded with each pass of the scanner. When it moved over the rug, the beep quickened once, twice, then slowed again. The enforcer adjusted a dial, scanned the area once. More, then turned away. You are clear, the enforcer said flatly. But before leaving, he stopped in the doorway and leaned closer to Jaren. If you are hiding her, human, you will die with her. The door closed behind him with a hiss. Jaren waited until the sound of boots faded down the hall before pulling the rug aside and lifting the boards. Leora climbed out slowly, her face pale. She wasn't shaking from the cold this time, it was fear. They know I'm close, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jaren rubbed a hand over his face. Then we can't stay here, her gaze locked on his. If you take me with you, they will hunt you too. Jaren gave a dry laugh. They already are. He grabbed his old travel pack, throwing in water, tools, and a battered blaster. Leora moved to help, but stopped when he pulled a small knife from the drawer and strapped it to her belt. You might need that, he said, for the first time. She looked at him with something that wasn't fear. They slipped out the back stairwell into the misty streets. Somewhere above, the deep hum of an enforcer patrol ship rolled through the air. Jaren pulled up his hood. Stay close. Don't speak. But before they reached the end of the street, a shadow passed over them. A black drone dropped from the sky, its red lens locking on Leora. The moment it beeped, Jaren fired his blaster. The drone shattered in midair, falling in a shower of sparks. They ran behind them. Alarms began to scream across the district. They didn't stop running until the city lights were nothing but a dull glow on the horizon. Jaren's legs ached. His lungs burned, but Leora didn't slow. Even in her weakened state, she moved like someone who had been running her whole life. They found shelter in the shell of an old cargo hauler, rusted through and abandoned in the wastelands. Jaren set a small heat lamp between them, its glow casting long shadows against the metal walls. For a while, neither spoke. They just sat there, breathing hard, listening to the wind whistle through the broken hull. Finally, Jaren broke the silence. You're going to have to tell me what's going on. Leora stared into the flickering light, her hands hidden beneath the blanket. If I tell you, you may wish you had left me in the street. Jaren leaned forward, his voice low but firm. You brought enforcers to my door. I think I deserve to know why. Her gaze lifted to meet his. For a moment, the violet glow of her eyes seemed brighter. Then she slowly unwrapped the blanket from her shoulders. Jaren's breath caught. Embedded just beneath the skin of her collarbone was a crystal, no bigger than his thumb, pulsing with a soft blue light. The faint glow matched the silver lines on her skin, as if they were tiny rivers carrying light through her body. This, she said quietly, is why they hunt me. Jaren frowned. A gemstone? Not a gemstone, Leora replied. It's called the Veilstone. My people are born with them. Inside, there is power enough to keep a warship running for 50 years. Jaren's mind spun. You're telling me they're killing you for fuel? She nodded, her jaw tight. Every Theta-born is hunted. We are captured, cut open, and the Veilstones are taken. We do not survive the process. Jaren felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He'd heard rumors of rare alien resources being harvested, but never like this. They won't stop, she continued, her voice cracking. Once they have your scent, they track you until there is nothing left to track. The heat lamp flickered, and for a moment, the small space seemed darker. Jaren glanced at the entrance, then back at her. So, if that thing is worth a fortune, why haven't you tried to sell it? Trade it for protection? She let out a bitter laugh. Because it's my life. Selling it is selling myself. The wind outside howled, rattling the hauler's metal frame. Jaren looked at her and realized something saving her wasn't just about keeping her alive. If the wrong people got to her, they'd keep hunting others like her. But that thought was interrupted by a sharp click in the distance. Not from the wind. Not from the ship's old frame. Jaren's hand went to his blaster instantly. "They found us," Leora whispered. The click came again, closer this time. Jaren killed the heat lamp with one twist, plunging them into darkness. The only light now came from the faint glow of the crystal under Leora's skin. "Cover it," he whispered. She pulled the blanket tight around her neck, dimming the glow. Outside, faint red beams of searchlights swept over the rusted hull of the old cargo hauler. The muffled hum of an engine grew louder, a patrol skimmer, circling low. Jaren's mind raced. The skimmer would have thermal sensors. They had seconds. At best, he pointed toward the far side of the hauler. "There's an old maintenance hatch. We slip out before they bang." The main entrance was kicked open, metal groaning under the force. Shadows moved inside, 3 enforcers in black armor, their visors glowing faint crimson. Jaren didn't wait. He grabbed Leora's hand and yanked her toward the hatch. They crawled through the narrow space, dust choking the air. The sound of heavy boots following. An enforcer's voice boomed behind them. "Theta 97 confirmed. Do not let the human escape with it." They burst out into the open wasteland, the cold night air slicing into their lungs. The patrol skimmer hovered ahead, its side gun already swiveling toward them. "Down!" Jaren shoved Leora to the ground as a bolt of plasma scorched the dirt where they'd been standing. He fired his blaster twice. One shot hit the gun's casing, sparking it into uselessness. The other missed entirely. "Move!" They sprinted toward a ridge of jagged rock. Behind them, the skimmer rose higher, engines screaming. Leora stumbled, her breath ragged. Jaren grabbed her arm to steady her. "Come on, you've got to keep moving." "I can't," she gasped. "Not without." A blast hit the ground to their right, throwing up a wave of dirt and stone. Jaren made a split-second decision. "Then we make a stand." They ducked behind the rocks, Jaren reloading. With shaking hands, he could hear the whine of the skimmer's engines as it closed in. Then Leora did something he didn't expect. She placed her palm over the crystal on her chest. The faint glow became brighter, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "What are you doing?" Jaren hissed. "Giving us a chance." A hum built in the air, deep enough to rattle the stones around them. The glow from her chest spread to her fingertips, then leaped outward in a sudden burst of light. The skimmer's engines sputtered and died mid-air. It dropped like a stone, slamming into the dirt with a metallic scream. Jaren stared at her, stunned. "You can do that?" She swayed, gripping the rock for balance. Not for long, and not without a cost. Jaren didn't press her for details. He just knew they had to keep moving. That night, they camped in the shadow of the ridge. The wind was brutal, but Leora sat close, their shoulders touching beneath the single blanket. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "You didn't have to save me in the market," she replied, her voice softer now. The silence between them was no longer tense. For the first time, it felt warm, but in the distance, faint lights moved across the horizon. Enforcer reinforcements. The hunt was far from over. By the second night in the wastelands, Jaren's supplies were running low. His water flask was almost empty, and Leora's energy was fading fast. The burst of power she'd used against the skimmer had drained her badly. They needed shelter, and fast. That's when Jaren spotted the faint glow of lights in the distance. It wasn't an enforcer patrol. The pattern was too uneven. A settlement, maybe, or an outpost. They approached cautiously. The buildings were low, patched together from scavenged metal, with smoke curling from a single chimney. A figure stepped out to meet them, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty coat. A long rifle slung over one arm. The man grinned as soon as he saw Jaren. By the stars, it's been years. Marek, Jaren said, almost smiling. Didn't think I'd see you. Again. The two clasped hands, and for a moment, Jaren let himself feel relief. Inside Marek's cabin, the heat from a small furnace was almost overwhelming after so many cold nights. Leora kept close to Jaren, her eyes never leaving Marek. Over a meal of stale bread and boiled root stew, Jaren explained, well, most of it. He told Marek they were being chased, that the enforcers wouldn't stop. He didn't mention the crystal. Marek listened, nodding slowly. There's an old smuggler's route out of the sector. I can take you there. You'll be safe once you cross the ridge. Jaren's shoulders loosened. You'd do that for me? Marek grinned. You saved my life once. I don't forget debts. That night, Marek gave them a place to sleep in. The back room. Leora lay on the bed while Jaren kept watch from a chair. The firelight painted her skin in warm tones, but her eyes stayed sharp. He's lying, she said quietly. Jaren frowned. You don't know him like I do. I know the way he looked at me, she said. Not at me, at what I carry. Jaren wanted to argue, but a sound outside the window stopped him. Soft footsteps in the dirt. He moved silently to the door, easing it open just enough to see Marek. The man was speaking into a small comm device, his voice low but urgent. Yes, confirmed. Theta 97. You'll have your payment when you arrive. The cold in Jaren's gut was worse than any wasteland wind. He stepped back into the room, his voice a whisper. Get up. We're leaving. Leora didn't ask questions. She pulled on her boots and followed him toward the back exit. But before they could slip out, Marek appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. You should have slept heavier, old friend, he said with a smirk. Would have made this easier. Jaren's hand went to his blaster. Don't do this, Marek. You have no idea what she's worth. This is the kind of payday that buys a man a whole city block. In the split second, Marek shifted his stance. Jaren fired. The shot caught Marek in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Liora pulled Jaren toward the open night, but not before the distant howl of enforcer sirens cut through the air. Marek's voice followed them into the dark. They're coming for you, Jaren. You can't run forever. The sirens grew louder, echoing off the jagged walls of the wasteland canyons. Jaren and Leora ran, their breaths sharp and fast in the freezing night. The ground crunched under their boots, every step a reminder they were running out of time. Up ahead, the land opened into a flat, barren stretch, nowhere to hide. And on the far side, the unmistakable silhouettes of enforcer skimmers waited, engines glowing like predator eyes in the dark. They're blocking the pass, Jaren said, slowing to a stop. His hand hovered over his blaster, but he knew it was pointless. There were too many of them. The enforcer captain stepped forward, his armor darker than the others, a long cloak billowing in the wind. Human, the captain said, his voice cold through the translator. Step aside. Hand over Theta 97, and you may leave alive. Jaren glanced at Leora. Her face was pale, but her eyes held a quiet, stubborn fire. She gave the smallest shake of her head. Don't do it. The captain's visor glinted. Decide quickly. You have no future with her. Jaren laughed once, short and bitter. No future? That's all I've got now. He stepped in front of Leora, raising his blaster, not at the enforcers, but at the crystal under her skin. You want her for this? You'll have to take it over my dead body. And hers. The captain's voice hardened. You would die for an alien you barely know? Jaren's grip tightened. I'd die before letting you cut her open like a machine. The captain raised his hand to give the kill order, but before the words came, Leora stepped out from behind Jaren. She placed her palm over his on the blaster and whispered, "Close your eyes." Jaren obeyed. A sudden pulse of light erupted from her chest. brighter than any sun Jaren had ever seen. It washed over the wasteland, searing through armor, frying circuits, and throwing the enforcers and their skimmers into the dirt. The sound was like 1,000 bells shattering at once. When Jaren opened his eyes, the night was quiet again. The enforcers lay unconscious, their weapons smoking. Their ships dead in the sand. Liora collapsed against him, weak and trembling. "It's done," she whispered. He held her upright, feeling her heartbeat slow. "You could have killed yourself doing that." She gave a faint smile. "You spent your last credit on me. I thought I should return the favor." Hours later, far from the battleground, they reached a small cabin deep in the mountains. Snow fell softly outside, muffling the world. Jaren lit a fire, the warmth filling the space. When he lay down, Liora curled beside him under the same blanket he'd bought in the market. This time, her body was warm, not from the fire, but from safety. For the first time since they met, she slept without trembling. And for the first time in years, Jaren realized he wasn't alone anymore.